At dawn, Korath moved to choke the Nauru's passage. Minutes later, Ravenclaw strike aircraft were already airborne.
From the outer coast, the response came fast. Low, loud, and precise, they tore into blockade craft before the corridor collapsed.
Operation Silent Meridian has restored transit control. Any hostile vessel entering the passage will be intercepted immediately.
120 warships. That is how many Iranian boats the United States Navy has destroyed or put out of action since February 28th. 2 carrier strike groups, 8 Aegis destroyers, and $40 billion of naval power spread across 2 oceans. And the result, the Strait of Hormuz is still closed. 95% of business shipping has disappeared. 3,200 vessels, including 250 oil tankers, sit anchored in the Gulf, going nowhere. We did not lose a single ship. We did not lose a single battle. We wiped out the whole Iranian submarine fleet, every Soleimani-class corvette, every drone carrier, every major surface warship Tehran ever built. And yet the shipping lane stays closed. The oil stays trapped. The world economy loses $40 billion every week. Why? Because the most powerful navy in human history had to pick up the phone and call the Air Force. More exactly, they needed a plane. The Air Force had been begging Congress to let them retire a 50-year-old airplane built in the 1970s to destroy Soviet tanks on the plains of Europe. A plane that top Pentagon leaders called old, repetitive, and not fit for modern war, right up until the moment they needed it more than almost anything else they had. Subscribe for more. We do not cheer for weapons, we figure out if they work. And this case is one of the strangest we have ever worked through. Type proud if the Warthog earned it. To understand why a carrier air wing cannot fix a problem that a Cold War relic fixes in its first sortie, we first need to understand the problem. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 nautical miles wide at its narrowest point, but that number fools you. The real shipping lane, the path where tankers must travel, is 6 nautical miles, 2 miles inbound, 2 miles outbound, and a 2-mile space between them. That is the whole playable area. Everything else is Iranian territorial water. Now think about the enemy inside that space. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy runs more than 1,500 fast attack craft, not warships, speedboats with fiberglass and composite hulls, most under 15 tons. The slowest ones go 50 knots. The fastest goes past 70. And Iran says some of its newest designs can go over 100. These are not targets radar was made to track. They are small, low on the water, and they move faster than most fun boats in Miami. Each one costs somewhere between $50,000 and $500,000, and each one carries an anti-ship missile, the Nasr-1, with a 35-kilometer range and a final speed of Mach 0.9. That is enough to badly damage a frigate. Their plan is simple. No swarm 30 to 50 boats attack at the same time from every direction, overload the sensors, overfill the defenses, force the destroyer to choose which boat to shoot, knowing that every missile it fires costs more than every boat it is aiming at. And that is the real problem. Let us look at the math. An SM-6 interceptor costs $5.3 million. Firing it at a $50,000 speedboat gives Iran a 100-to-1 cost win. A Harpoon costs $1.5 million and was built to track cruiser-sized targets, not composite skiffs doing 70 knots between cargo ships. The Mark 45 5-inch gun fires 16 to 20 rounds a minute, good enough against one target, useless against 50. The Phalanx CIOS empties its magazine in 20 seconds and takes 4 minutes to reload. And the FA-18E Super Hornet, the carrier's main strike aircraft, costs $30,000 per flight hour, though flies too fast to clearly tell an IRGC boat from a fishing trawler among 3,200 civilian vessels, and its on-station time at combat loadout is only a small part of what this mission needs. The Navy does have one tool built for this kind of fight, the MH-60R Seahawk helicopter. It carries Hellfire missiles and a machine gun mounted in the cabin. It can patrol, identify, and hit small surface targets. But the Seahawk was built mostly for anti-submarine warfare, not for hunting 50 fast boats at one time. It carries 4 to 8 Hellfires per sortie, depending on the setup, has less loiter time than a fixed-wing aircraft, and it is open to the same 12.7 millimeter and 14.5 millimeter gunfire that fills Hormuz without the 12,200-pound titanium shell that keeps an A-10 pilot alive. The Seahawk is a scalpel. The swarm problem needs a chainsaw. And so the missiles are too costly, the guns are too slow, the jets are too fast, and the helicopter's too small. That is not a list of bad weapons. That is a pattern. And that pattern points to something, deeper. Every weapon in the Carrier Strike Group's toolbox was built for blue water, open ocean, high value targets, long range, and expensive weapons matched to expensive threats. The Strait of Hormuz is brown water, a 6-mile corridor filled with cheap, fast, many targets hiding among thousands of civilian ships. The Navy brought a surgical laser to a knife fight, and the knife fight needed a shotgun. The funny part is, the shotgun already existed. The Pentagon just wanted to throw it away. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, the Warthog, is built around a gun, literally. The GAU-8 Avenger was designed first. The airplane was built around it. That 7-barrel Gatling cannon fires 30 millimeter depleted uranium rounds at 3,900 per minute, 65 rounds every second. The aircraft carries 1,150 rounds in a drum the size of a Volkswagen Beetle. In a 2-second burst, the standard attack, the pilot sends about 130 rounds downrange. Cost per round about $137 for the armor-piercing DU version. Let us do the math that changes everything. 70 rounds into a fiberglass fast boat equals under $10,000. The same kill with an SM-6 costs $5.3 million. That is a 500 to 1 cost edge. Not a small improvement, a total change in the math of battle. But the gun is only part of the story. The A-10 carries 16,000 pounds of ordnance across 11 hard points. For medium-range targets, a payoff at 12 nautical miles, the pilot fires an AGM-65 Maverick, an infrared-guided missile that costs between $150,000 and $170,000. Still 30 times cheaper than an SM-6. For fast boats mixed with drones, the A-10 carries APKWS, a laser guidance kit attached to a standard Hydra 70 rocket. Cost per shot about $35,000. Precision guidance for the price of a mid-range sedan. Now think about the physics that make those weapons work at Hormuz. The A-10's top speed is Mach 0.75, about 420 miles per hour. But when it drops to low altitude and starts its patrol loops, it flies around 300 knots. And this is a strength, not a weakness. When an FA-18E crosses the shipping lane at more than 500 knots, every target on the surface stays in the pilot's view for less than 2 seconds. At that speed, telling an IRGC boat from a Kuwaiti fishing dhow among 3,200 civilian vessels is almost impossible. Oh, it's the A-10 at 300 knots, gives the pilot 2 to 3 times more time to identify, confirm, and attack. The pilot does not depend on sensor screens. With their head down, the pilot looks out the canopy, sees the rocket launchers bolted to the side, sees the military paint, and pulls the trigger. Compare that to the Navy's MH-60R Seahawk, the tool we talked about earlier. The Seahawk cruises at about 140 knots and carries 4 to 8 Hellfires. It can identify and attack, but it covers less than half the area the A-10 covers in the same time. It carries 1/10 of the weapons and must return to the ship after 90 minutes. An A-10 at 300 knots with 1,150 cannon rounds, 6 Mavericks, and external fuel tanks does not replace the Seahawk. It works in a category the Seahawk was never built to enter. That is what loiter means in engineering terms. The A-10 stays on station for about 1 hour and 50 minutes on internal fuel, and with 600-gallon external tanks that stretches to 2.5 hours over the strait, flying loop patterns, scanning, waiting, and choosing. The aircraft does not burn through its fuel racing to and from a carrier 200 miles away. It stays in the kill zone again and again, and the wings explain why it does this so well. The A-10 uses straight wings, not the swept wings of the FA-18 or F-35. Swept wings reduce drag at high Mach numbers, but increase it at low speeds. The A-10 never needs high Mach. At 300 knots, straight wings create lift more efficiently, burn less fuel, and give a tighter turn radius. That last point matters a lot. With the shipping lane only 6 nautical miles wide, the A-10 can bank, turn back, and enter its patrol loop again without ever leaving the battle corridor. The straight wing also makes a steadier gun platform. Less shaking at low speed means the GAU-8 puts rounds exactly where the pilot aims during a strafing run. One more thing about that gun, the recoil force of the GAU-8 at full rate is about 45 kilonewtons, 10,000 pounds of force. Each of the A-10's 2 TF-34 engines makes about 40 kilonewtons of thrust. In a 2-second burst, the gun creates almost as much backward force as one engine creates forward. The airplane actually slows down while firing. That is not a design mistake. It shows how much force the weapon delivers. Each 30mm DU penetrator leaves the barrel at over 1,000 meters per second, carrying about 267 kilojoules of energy, enough to punch through 69 millimeters of rolled homogeneous armor. A fiberglass fast boat has 0 armor. This is not a fair fight. It was never meant to be, and the A-10 will take the hits that come back. The pilot sits inside a 12,200-pound titanium bathtub, the only aircraft in the American inventory that wraps its cockpit in armor, built to survive 23mm armor-piercing rounds and 57mm fragments. In Desert Storm, Colonel Bobby Efferson brought home an A-10 with 378 holes in the airframe. In Iraq in 2003, Captain Kim Campbell of the 75th Expeditionary Fighter Squadron lost all hydraulic control over Baghdad with both main and backup lines cut, and flew her A-10 home using manual reversion, a system of cranks and cables that bypasses every electronic and hydraulic control surface. She landed safely. The Distinguished Flying Cross came next. That survivability is not just theory at Hormuz. The IRGC's coastal positions fire 12.7mm and 14.5mm machine guns. An FA-18 avoids that danger by flying high and then loses target identification. The A-10 flies low, takes the hits, and keeps firing because that is what it was built to do. But one airplane, no matter how tough, cannot hold a 6-mile corridor by itself. But the A-10 does not work alone. What is happening above the Strait of Hormuz right now is something the American military has never done before in combat. 3 branches of the armed forces working at the same time over one 6-mile naval corridor, each covering the gap the others cannot fill. Layer 1 is the A-10 Air Force. It flies loop patterns at 3,000 feet, hunting fast boats and coastal missile sites. The GAU-8 and a PKWS handle close-range threats. The Maverick handles targets at 12 nautical miles. You know, the A-10 cost $19,000 per flight hour. Layer 2 is the AH-64 Apache, Army attack helicopters, working from expeditionary sea bases, floating forward operating bases for Army aviation. This is a concept first tested in real operations in 2020 aboard the USS Lewis B. Puller and now used at scale. Army attack helicopters launching from a Navy platform to fight a naval battle. Each Apache carries up to 16 Hellfire missiles at $70,000 to $200,000 each and a 30mm M230 chain gun, the same caliber as the Warthogs, but chain-driven instead of Gatling. Very effective against unarmored boats. They fly at 200 feet below the A-10, taking out the targets that slip through. Layer 3 is the Navy itself. Aegis destroyers and littoral combat ships keep the air defense shield and surface patrol in place. The destroyers saved their SM-6 missiles for the threats that truly deserve that cost. Anti-ship ballistic missiles, cruise missiles flying at Mach 3, Odin and Helios directed energy systems handle drones. The LCS sends out its own drone swarms and mine-clearing systems. Here is the combined arms equation. Before combined arms, the Navy fought fast boats with SM-6 interceptors, $5.3 million per shot against $50,000 targets, draining 90 to 96 VLS cells on each destroyer, and many of those are already set aside for Tomahawks, SM-2s, and ESSM quad packs. After combined arms, the A-10 handles the fast boats for $10,000 per engagement. The Apache handles the close threats for $70,000, and the Navy saves its missile stock for the Mach 3 threats that nothing else can stop. The VLS cells last 10 times longer. The math flips. Iran's strategic mistake was thinking the Navy would fight alone. Their swarm plan was built to drain VLS cells 1,500 fast boats against 96 vertical launch tubes. The math was done on purpose. The IRGC studied the 2002 Millennium Challenge war game where a retired Marine Lieutenant General used swarm boats to sink 16 American warships in the opening phase and forced the Pentagon to restart the exercise. Iran built a whole naval strategy around that simulation, but they built it for a situation where the Navy answers alone. They did not count on the Air Force flying at 3,000 feet with a gun that fires 65 rounds a second, or the Army flying at 200 feet with laser-guided missiles launched from a ship. The equation changes when the variables change. So the question that started this video deserves its answer. If this breakdown changed, how you see naval warfare, subscribe and type Warthog in the comments if you think the A-10 earned its place in this fight. So why did the most powerful Navy in human history need to call the Air Force? Not because the Navy is weak. The Navy was built for blue water, open ocean, capital ships, and precision weapons measured in hundreds of nautical miles. The Strait of Hormuz is brown water, a 6-mile shipping lane, 1,500 composite speedboats, and cheap weapons that need cheap answers. A good engineer does not use a wrench to hammer a nail. A good engineer picks the right tool. The strange part is that the right tool was an airplane the Air Force wanted to throw away. $19,000 per flight hour versus $30,000. $10,000 per kill versus $5.3 million. The answer to a problem worth billions of dollars in trapped oil. Yeah, a 50-year-old aircraft flying 300 knots with a gun that weighs more than a Volkswagen Beetle. But the A-10 will retire. Congress now stops the Air Force from cutting the fleet below 103 aircraft through September 2026. But the transition plan for 2027 through 2029 is still open. The question is not whether to keep the Warthog forever. The question is this: When the A-10 leaves, what fills the gap? Loitering drones with 30-millimeter cannons, the MQ-9 Reaper changed for maritime interdiction, or does the Navy finally build its own brown water weapon, an aircraft designed not for the deep ocean, but for the narrow, contested corridors where wars are really fought? We do not worship the machine. We worship the equation. And the equation says the right tool wins, not the expensive one.